Welcome to the Reroll Multiple Martial Arts podcast, where we explore the intersections between martial arts, society, and culture. I'm Elliot.
I'm Danny.
And in our last talk, we talked about the value of traditional martial arts and what we look for in a skill set and how different skill sets are contextual to, where they are and so on and so forth. And well, I've been thinking a lot about this, and one comparison I can think of is an academic one, where at least in the English composition side, that a lot of people argue that a student has to understand all of the rules of writing and the different styles and how to write in XYZ in order to break the rules. And I was thinking, is that a legitimate comparison to martial arts? Because I think there's a lot of formality in martial arts, traditional martial arts, a lot of, belt ranking system and all that stuff. Or saying, do we call the sensei or, master outside of the dojo or the, martial arts gym? I mean, do you call them, hey, Bob? Or do we say Sensei Bob, at the market, So, but anyway, in that sense, how far does traditionalism go in our daily lives? Does it end at the gym? And, do we have to understand all the rules in order to break it? Can we just bend it? What do you think, Danny?
I think that the conversation on traditional martial arts is one that I've been hearing a lot for, in different contexts, but mainly it really kind of says, is there any value in training in what they call traditional martial arts? But I also find it a little bit difficult that I don't know how many of those arts are categorized as traditional martial arts. And maybe it has to do with how they teach them. Because like my background is in Shotokan karate. And I've taken, I think not all, but a lot of the quote unquote traditional martial arts. Like I took judo, I took aikido, I took taekwondo. And when I think about these, I kind of compare them to like the non-traditional ones, such as like Krav Maga or some of these like hybrid combat-based martial arts, MMA, for example. And the contrast, I think, has to do with how they're taught, for at least for me, and not what they teach. Because I've been in an MMA class and we were learning the front snap kick or the roundhouse kick. And I was like, well, this is exactly what I remember doing in Shotokan. So what's the difference? But I think what you are identifying is the idea of saying, yeah, but in MMA, we don't have a ranking system. We don't have this idea of the hierarchy and what's the word I'm looking for? Respect is there. Maybe veneration of the sensei. Because I think even MMA gyms, you respect your coach. I mean, you don't go there and like disrespect them. But you don't give them, I don't know, this level of honorary position. And maybe that's what people are kind of articulating as in a fatigue. Like we're done with calling someone a sensei and bowing in front of them. But I think those things to me are important because they really kind of highlight a divide in training, the traditional versus the non.
No, that's interesting. I mean, because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is so popular in MMA, the belt ranking system and all that stuff is super huge. But there's also, no-gi. You trained in no-gi, have you? Is there a belt system there? How is that ranked? Because it is kind of formal, but it's also not.
So in MMA, well, not MMA, in no-gi, there is there's an older generation that didn't have it. So that what I think about it is the sense that like I remember the very first no-gi class that I took was called a grappling class. It didn't even say no-gi. It just said the sense that like you just went in and you learned techniques. And I wonder if it came from catch wrestling, because the person I trained with was he had been working out for a long time, so he was versed in this. I would say for at least over 20 years. And when I started training, this was in the early 2000s. So let's say that he started in the 80s. So the idea of jiu-jitsu in the 80s was like almost non-existent in the United States. But it was existent in judo. Judo did jiu-jitsu, did newaza. And then this person had no ranking. There was no ranking. You knew who was better because of the fact that you knew that students were there longer. So he even would rely on older students or students that were there longer to warm up the class, to kind of help the new people. So you could see there was some level of ranking, but there was no belt. And then in the no-gi world that I think is more present today as a term, a lot of them use the jiu-jitsu ranking system so that you wear a rash guard that turns blue when you're a blue belt, a rash guard that is purple, brown, or black. And I want to say that that's like very common. There's a few spaces that say like we don't do that, we don't even believe in it, but I would say that's the minority. The numerical inventory is that even the no-gi uses some type of ranking and very much rooted in either judo or jiu-jitsu because it's the same color scheme.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about the idea of martial arts versus fighting skill, and you've mentioned it before, but with the martial arts, we think of course, the traditionalism, that formality, but also a sense of philosophy, the approach and how to do it, maybe certain books or meditation or something related to the mental side and not just the brute side of it. And, I always try to think of the philosophical side, even though, I guess on my own, even though there isn't much isn't taught at the gym, I try to think about why we do it and the skills and this whole idea of it shouldn't be a versus of who's better and like and also a sense of like nationalism. There's a lot of that in traditional martial arts, and so I always think what is that next step beyond I don't know, maybe the new traditionalism of where the whole country and nationalism isn't that big of a deal, and that it is more of a mesh of everything, because it's become more of that. The Muay Thai gym I went to before, it was later I found out, it's more like Dutch kickboxing because they combined karate and Muay Thai and kickboxing and stuff like that. So and it's very interesting, because that the first gym I went to, which I really liked, kind of formed my foundation. It was a dojo. The place I went to was a dojo, but they also had Muay Thai classes and had really good Muay Thai competitors there. But we say os, and so like those who don't know, in BJJ gyms, people say os, karate os, but Muay Thai never says os, but we said os, and I thought that was really, really neat. And I feel like I'm rambling, but it is like the new traditionalism. We're bending and making new traditions.
I really like your new take on new traditionalism, because the binary of traditional versus non-traditional martial arts makes a little bit of sense as people think about MMA gyms or some of these hybrid martial arts. I would even argue like Krav Maga is one of them. that really find it difficult to kind of, not difficult, let me take that back, that they stand as saying, we're new and we reject this idea that, this has been passed on for like 20 generations. So what I think about this is this sense that like the model of the traditional is really about context and comparison, so that maybe for right now it seems non-traditional, but give it 20 years and I think it will be traditional, because someone will perceive this thing of protecting this discipline so that it becomes institutionalized, recorded, and reproduced in very clear ways. And I don't think we're there yet, but I find something quite interesting that a lot of us start with traditional martial arts as a foundation, and we carry it over into the new arts. So you mentioned the word os, and I know that like for me in the karate space, it was very common. Almost every dojo I went to said os. I don't remember them saying it in Taekwondo, but it's been a long time. I don't remember them saying it and I don't remember them saying it in Judo either.
Oh, really?
I don't remember it. I'm just saying that's the only drawback. Memory sometimes fades. But when I did see it in Jiu-Jitsu, it was awkward because there were little battles of people saying, hey, stop that. Even in Jiu-Jitsu. Because the early Jiu-Jitsu that I started kind of training with was that remnants of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So they weren't American Jiu-Jitsu senseis. They were, even when they were American, they gave credit that their senseis were Brazilian. So to speak of this idea of newness, I think in Jiu-Jitsu, I think it's transitioning away. Most of the Jiu-Jitsu spots are becoming quite settled, and by settled I mean is that they're starting to build their legacy, their genealogy, so that you don't go to a dojo and say like, wow, you don't have any black belts. Most dojos got one or two. And what does that mean? That means that person, at least in Jiu-Jitsu, on average 10 years of training. So that means that there's a depth of 10 years of history in that dojo. To me, now we're starting to get really close into what we're talking about traditionalism, because some places want it. Some places want this traditionalism because what they want is this sense of validity and saying, oh, you don't have it's not just a bunch of white belts. It's like all these different layers of history and experience in it.
No, it is. It is kind of cool, going to a BJJ gym, and the professors there, they have that accent, the Portuguese accent or something related to that, and it feels authentic, a little bit of it. It is, and so I get it. It's almost like, all right, going to it's like going to a Muay Thai gym and getting, being taught by a former Thai fighter. It's just a little bit different, that feeling. And I don't know, maybe it's a psychological thing. I mean, I'm sure, there's a lot of great guys out there, hands down, of course, who are, but see, this gets to that nationalism thing, or that cultural identity thing where, oh, you know what? No, got to go to Thailand for the real deal. But right now, though, it still holds true. I think this martial arts has evolved so much, but in the greater scheme of things, this is all still very new. This is 20 years, this mixed martial arts stuff, and people, just realized, about Muay Thai and everything like that in certain respects. Listening to, in reference to Joe Rogan, seeing UFC, the first 10 UFC events versus now. It's a different sport. Rules have changed, and now people have like you said, Danny, you got to train A, B, and C to have that training. And even then, you hear Israel Adesanya say that a lot of strikers in the UFC doesn't have that great of striking in comparison to other parts of the world. The wrestling is amazing, it's top notch, and say ONE FC is more known for striking rather than ground game. And so all this stuff is still, I think, still very new, and this, we're still forming what does MMA mean? What is, because it's really, really amorphous.
So my take on MMA is that it is an awkward place in the way that it is. It says mixed martial arts, but it's not. Yeah, like I appreciate how you said, like, MMA of 10 years ago is not the MMA of today, and for sure it will not be the MMA of 10 years into the future. But there's this thing that I think a lot of us are still stuck on, and I feel that it's important to kind of highlight this deviation in the conversation, that when we started talking the last episode, I wanted to talk about something which I said, like, I want to defend traditional martial arts. In particular, I want to defend an art that I didn't even train in. I want to defend Kung Fu. And the reason I was stuck on that was that my belief was that the art itself carried the basic techniques of fighting as a collection that were necessary, and not just necessary, were evident in all the other martial arts. So I was really struggling to say, why are we saying like this is no good when it has a jab, it has a cross, has an uppercut, has an elbow strike, it has all these things. So then the question is, well, maybe now we can talk about this divide, because the original contradiction or the original position against traditional martial arts seems to have been rooted in MMA. It wasn't Shotokan karate saying, oh, traditional martial arts, especially Kung Fu, is dead. It wasn't judo saying that. It was MMA. But then the thing as an observation is that MMA relies on traditional martial art for its actual operation, so that you may think of yourself as a traditional martial artist from the Muay Thai tradition, but you go to MMA and they work with your pads and they help you kind of transition it into a sport format. Maybe you come from a traditional martial art, Shotokan or Taekwondo. They rely on all these arts. So I just think that that's where I get stuck. I think MMA is barely beginning to frame its own genealogy, as I said earlier. It's barely getting to the place of bringing up its own students under its own terms.
I could just end the conversation right there. That was great. That was just like, I was like, wow, that was very well put. Something so obvious, but you said it in a way where it just all makes sense, because MMA seems, because it's so young, it seems to be like that teenager that's rejecting everything, like, man, I don't need you, man. I got this, but hey, let's look into the roots. It's a collection of various things, and we have to pay respects to all the things that brought us up. And to I know I'm sorry I have to bring up Bruce Lee every episode. It's like, yeah, UFC has Bruce Lee shirts, because look, you can see some of the early pictures. Bruce Lee had those MMA gloves on, the bulky or less bulky boxing gloves, and it's like with the fingers and everything. So that's like really cool. And but yeah, I mean, MMA that relies on traditional martial arts in order for its form to exist. I mean, right there, D, I think I really don't know what to say after that, because you kind of just like put it all in a box. And
But I think the
Go ahead.
reason why we were having this talk originally was because there is a statement that I think it's important to highlight, and it's been stated many times here as well as elsewhere, which is that traditional martial arts were dead or are dead. They're useless in the age of MMA. So that whatever I said earlier, which to me was the idea of recognizing that MMA is a very new discipline, but as you kind of signaled, that it's also reliant on the fact that traditional martial arts have existed and continue to exist by producing these young men and women that are versed in very specific arts. But there's also something that I think is significant, that the comparison between the martial arts, by calling each other invalid or weak or useless, is an old practice. So I want to give credit to MMA looking at the other arts and saying, I don't think you can beat me. But I want to put it this way, as a reproduction of something that has been done many, many times. And you mentioned Bruce Lee as this icon that I think MMA unofficially kind of says, like, this is one of the first mixed martial artists that we've had. But I also think about like Gene LaBelle, the American judoka, which worked with Bruce Lee. You can see him as being a stunt double in the early films, because Gene LaBelle as a judoka ended up being instrumental in Hollywood and giving character to the way things were going to be choreographed. So you can see a young Gene LaBelle in a lot of these 1960s, 50s, 70s. Actually, he's been doing it forever. So, but I think about him being one of the first ones to really kind of start saying, judo is really good, and boxing thinks that it's the best, and there's a call out, and he takes that call out, and it's televised where he takes on a boxer. That's an old position to have these respective arts saying, what would happen if a boxer fights a karate guy? What would happen if a karate guy fights a judoka? I think the MMA position on looking at traditional martial arts is part of that same template, that same pattern of like one art looking at the other and go, I don't think you can take me.
No, that's exactly it. Because, Royce Gracie, he was UFC 1, right? Yeah, no one thought that a grappler, you can say, was gonna beat a striker, for the longest time, and hey, if he didn't win, if Royce didn't win, I don't know how UFC or MMA would grow into, but that just blew everybody away. Like, what is this thing? Like, what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And then history goes, and I think of my I just think if I had paid more attention, if I was really into martial arts when I was younger, my life, I think, would have totally changed. I would probably want to do like a physical therapy or something, some sort of but hey, life finds a way, it makes a circle. I mean, I'm training now, better late than never.
No, I think that's the thing. Like, the question of like looking at traditional martial arts and saying Kung Fu is dead, Chinese boxing is dead, or whatever, Aikido is dead. It's really a few people saying that. And I think it's important to think about how we're talking about this. You and I have been training in different martial arts, but we share a very sincere interest in it. And I think that's very different than someone that doesn't want to fight. Like, for example, like, at least me, I know that like I never really enjoyed tournaments. I remember being in what, junior high, and that's when I started training. And my sensei would take us to tournaments, and I did them. And I never liked them. And I didn't like them because I think one is that I wasn't good at them. So obviously, if I was winning, I probably would. But I didn't like them because I didn't understand them. I could tell they weren't really fighting. I mean, I could tell that I really wasn't fighting, because when we fought in the playground, it was like MMA before we even knew what MMA was. So that someone would get on the ground, someone would be sitting, pulling hair, biting, torn shirts, and in at that time I was doing Kenjutsu. It was beautiful. It's Okinawan style, very linear, very similar to like Shotokan and Shitaru and all of these other ones. Very, very hard. Like even then, when I was 13, it was a full kick to the stomach. You weren't allowed to get hit in the face, punches, but a full punch to the body. And at 13, you felt it. You're like, whoa, that knocked the wind out of me, or I'm kicking fully to that person's stomach. But what I want to get to it, I'm kind of rambling here, is that you don't have to fight to enjoy and learn from traditional martial arts. So that like my sister for a while did kung fu, and I was really like telling her, don't, like, do some jiu-jitsu. I really want to see you do jiu-jitsu. And she's like, stop, I'm not interested, I'm gonna do kung fu. And she was so excited. I mean, it was really beautiful to see her be excited about her kung fu classes. And I think that's where traditional martial arts exist. Like, they're offering you something that is genuinely more than simply fighting. And I do want to say something unique, though, is that there is a line between not being a fraud, not being delusional, but not being the most accurate in saying this will be effective. So that like when I did Aikido, I don't know if I really believed it, but I always thought like it would work somehow. And I think the wrist locks work, and the turning around, like when someone grabs your hand and you yourself turn around, that works. I've seen it work. But I think that as a martial art, it's not designed to really put you in the ring. And even the foundational like sensei who builds Aikido is a pacifist. So it tells you you're in Aikido, you're dedicating your energy to peace. And it's, some people would say, well, that's what I do when I do jiu-jitsu. It's like, nah, you're not. Jiu-jitsu is a gentle art, they say. But we know that when you're training, in your mind is like, this person is trying to hurt me. What if this was real? So it's not based on peace. It's based on self-defense, and I think those are different. I mean, like I just want to state that for me, traditional martial arts are much more comprehensive and valuable than just the act of fighting.
Yeah, seeing the cell phone videos of, street fights or playground fights or whatever, school fights, I see that MMA and UFC has definitely changed that the approach to fighting. It's totally different now. You don't see, like ground and pound wasn't that really that popular in the late 90s when I was in high school. So it's definitely changed. But going off what you're saying, yes, I mean, I don't expect Tai Chi to, be a competitive competition martial art. It is a type of movement, of breathing, almost like a meditative. It's almost like yoga. You're holding these positions, going really slow, and so your muscles are working. And it's funny because it also brings into gi BJJ versus no-gi BJJ of this whole traditional, non-traditional thing. And there are benefits to both. I think it's not one or the other, and I don't think it's fair for to poo-poo on one or the other. I think it's fine. Embrace it all. I think doing this whole factional thing is more damaging. I mean, you see, because it's almost like a different sport. So you're learning different techniques. Am I accurate with that? I mean, you see, there's that video in Japan of this like cool guy, kind of picking on this like other guy, and the cool guy grabs regular guy grabs his jacket, and regular guy just does a judo throw, bam, right in the train car, and the cool guy is on the ground in pain, and I'm like, hey, he grabbed that person's jacket. That's from grabbing like a gi. I think it's really similar. So anyway, embracing everything. It's almost like my religious approach. Embrace everything.
What if we talk about this contradiction, or not contradiction, this context? In the last episode, I was saying that I wanted to take the position of defending traditional martial arts. But I was also talking about the sport conversion of some of these arts and what they lost. You signal something really significant here, that I think the distinction between traditional martial arts and non-traditional can be replaced as traditional versus sport. Because I don't think MMA has become a practice that people take as a standalone self-defense art. People who take MMA, for example, my daughter did an MMA class. She attended an MMA school for about a year after she had done jiu-jitsu and before she did judo. And I would go there and sit there, and I would talk to the senseis, not the sensei, the coaches, the teachers. They were all MMA fighters, So the coach was a young man, probably like 21. And the head instructor was probably like in his mid-30s, and he had fought. They had pictures of him, and he's actually really well known. But they were fighters. And I'm not taking away their ability to defend themselves. In fact, they can defend themselves. They're not going to be people that would be without tools should a self-defense situation require that. But the art itself that they practice and teach was rooted in sport. In fact, one of the classes we were there, the coach Herb Dean was holding his seminar for the referees, and it was like interesting because I was like, it was all mixed in, like that would never happen in my traditional Shotokan class. Like we wouldn't get interrupted so that like some sport could run their workshop. It's like, no, my sensei would get into these habits of like, if you got off the floor without asking permission, you couldn't get back on. If you were new, he would be polite. I remember one time, this is Sensei, I'll say his name because I think he didn't do anything wrong. Sensei Otis, who's a traditional Shotokan sensei under Ray Dalkey. And for those that follow American genealogy, Ray Dalkey is one of the first Americans to get a black belt under Nishiyama, who's under Funikoshi. Like this is this genealogy of Shotokan people. Well, I was there, and this young man is in training with us. He gets thirsty. He walks off the floor, and Sensei Otis locked the door. And the guy is knocking to get back on, and he just ignores him. And then once the class is over, he lets him back in, and then he tells him, hey, there's protocols. Like, you don't just get off the floor. Like, in general, you don't get off the floor anyway until we don't take water breaks. There's no such thing as water breaks in that period. In some schools, they do it, but in old school karate, you don't do any of that. Like you get on the floor and then sensei tells you when to get off the floor. Well, those are these things that are not visible in MMA. In those gyms, they were really much like a training thing, so that I would see them do drills and then time, go get water. And I at the time, I'm the water boy, so my daughter would get off the floor and I like, here's your water, here's your towel, you know, and I think that's a difference. Like MMA is still very much tied into its sport. And I think that's going to be a key distinction between traditional martial arts and MMA that should be addressed. Because the sport can only take you so far, I think. I think it can take you... I told you about this distinction that a lot of us have had, which is like when someone asks you, hey, I have a young daughter or a young boy that want to learn a martial art, what should they take? What's the fastest one? And I'm honest, I was like, do you want fast or slow? Do you want discipline or not discipline? Because they change. You know, it's like, I think, you know, a Shotokan practitioner takes a long time to really become really good at fighting. But Muay Thai or boxing, I think really fast, you know, but I don't think they offer the same type of space of caretaking of their human development.
With that said, this has been Reroll Multiple Martial Arts podcast, where we explore the intersections between martial arts society and culture. And until next time, peace.